This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Protests greet Ben Salah's appointment as interim president of Algeria. UN calls for detention centres to release migrants in Libya. And Egyptians to vote on re-establishment of Upper House. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Uche Okoronkwo joins me now with all your business headlines.
Thank you, Karen. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Bits. Zimbabwe seeks about $600 million in assistance from donors after a drought and cyclone Idai. And Africa requires an additional $638 billion annually to meet its sustainable development goals before the 2030 target. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Uche. We begin this hour in Algeria. A day after the appointment of Abdelkader Ben Salah as interim president, there's been opposition on the streets of the capital, Algiers. Protesters are calling for his replacement. Noel Mwakugu has the latest on that.
Hours after Algeria's upper house appointed Abdelkader Ben Salah as interim president, protesters are back on the streets. They claim Ben Salah does not represent their interests.
We are calling on these people to go away. We are tired of them. They don't seem to understand this. We want Ben Salah and the entire system to leave. Bedou, Ben Salah, and the rest must leave without exception.
The fellows in government are trying to provoke us. But no, we are educated and we are peaceful. We are the youth who were there in the very first moment against the fifth term. When we started, they used to call us thugs, but now you can see it for yourself.
To some, Ben Salah represents a continuation of the ruling elite, locally known as the gang.
They have to go. They just have to go. The whole government, the whole gang. That's it. It's enough.
We demand that Ben Salah leaves, that we change the government. They all have to leave. The youth has to take their place.
Meanwhile, through a televised address, the newly appointed president promised a free and fair elections in 90 days. According to Algerian law, the interim president is not allowed to contest in the elections. Before his appointment, Abdelkader Ben Salah was the president of Algiers' upper house, known as the Council of the Nation, a close ally of immediate former President Abdulaziz Bouteflika. And when Bouteflika suffered a stroke in the last part of his rule, Ben Salah took up the state roles. Noel Mwakugu, CGTN.
Now to Libya. As fighting intensifies there, tens of thousands of migrants remain at risk. The United Nations is calling for migrant detention centres to release their detainees. Here's more on that story.
African migrants hoping to reach Europe often use Libya as a final transit point. Many end up in detention centres, where poor conditions are common. UN officials now worry immigrants stuck in these detention centres could be forcefully recruited to fight.
Based on previous experience in Libya, we're also concerned that migrants may be used as human shields or forcefully recruited to fight as well.
There are 5,700 refugees currently being held in Libyan detention centres. This doesn't account for those being held in informal centres.
So we have spoken to refugees in detention centers who tell us that they can hear the clashes and many are really scared. So joining the call with the others, we are concerned about the situation of refugees and migrants in detention who are detained in areas where active conflict is ongoing. We are asking, advocating for release of all refugees and migrants from detention.
The UN's refugee agency has relocated 150 refugees from a detention center in southern Tripoli. UNHCR is now working with officials to safely relocate other vulnerable migrants. Astatal, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, urged countries to adopt a more welcoming approach towards refugees.
The global refugee crisis has garnered varied responses globally. From America, where President Donald Trump has taken a hard stance against migrants crossing into the country, to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who stated that Canada is open to immigration. Speaking to the Security Council, Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, spoke on the need for politicians to avoid negative rhetoric towards refugees.
I have never seen in my career so much toxic language in respect of refugees and migrants. And I think it is very not right and unfair to these people that are fleeing because they seek safety from war, from persecution, and even if they are migrants, they seek better opportunities.
The Global Compact on Migration provides a framework for countries to cooperate in efforts to manage immigration more effectively. The compact also specified the rights of migrants and refugees. The intergovernmentally negotiated compact was endorsed in the UN General Assembly, with 152 countries voting in favor of the agreement.
The Global Compact provides a blueprint for better responses. A blueprint that is not only humanitarian, but goes beyond to the medium and long term. And a type of response that is key not only from the humanitarian point of view, but also, and this is your perspective, for the stability of entire region. And hence, directly it is of your concern.
In 2018, nearly 70 million people were displaced, with the UN estimating most were fleeing conflict. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
Over to Nigeria now, where the army says that on Tuesday it prevented a Boko Haram attack near to the northern city of Damaturu, killing several militants and seizing weapons there. This would have been the first raid in the city by the group since 2014. Wiping out Boko Haram remains a key focus for Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari. Collective military efforts by West African countries have forced them into hiding, but the jihadist militants are still active in the region. Well, CGTN's Phil Ehaza joins us now for more and that story. What is the latest on security developments in Zamfara, Kaduna and some other parts of the country?
Oh, thank you, Karen. The latest is the fact that the president, Muhammadu Buhari, has returned to the country. In fact, he did that a day earlier than planned. He was supposed to return today, but he returned to the country yesterday from the United Arab Emirates, where he was invited to attend a World Economic Forum. And he also presented a keynote address and met with a couple of top investors to discuss investment opportunities in Africa's largest economy. Also, while he was in the United Arab Emirates, he of course, responded to the several news and protests in Nigeria about the recent killings in Zamfara, Kaduna and Rivers State, where he said that he is one of the unhappiest leaders in the country and he's doing his best to ensure that he tackles the security in the country. Of course, the fact that he returned to the country earlier will not be unconnected to the killings in the country, but he has taken steps to ensure that the spate of killings is tackled by the security agencies. He's actually launched a new operation known as Operation Puff Adder, targeted strictly at the bandits and kidnappers in these regions, talking about the Zamfara, Rivers and Kaduna State. And he has also suspended all mining activities in Zamfara State because Zamfara State is, like many other states, rich in mineral deposits, in this case gold, but it is done illegally. Majority of the community, the residents in the state do that illegally, and therefore it has created this case of banditry who kill at any slightest provocation.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was CGTN's Phil Ehaza there, joining us from Abuja. Meanwhile, Nigeria's government has suspended mining in the northwestern state of Zamfara. The suspension highlights the breakdown of security, as we've been saying, in a part of the country where the military, police and state security forces have been deployed in recent weeks to tackle criminal gangs behind a spate of killings and kidnappings there. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports.
Zamfara state in the northwest is home to large quantity of gold and other minerals such as barite, nickel and manganese were recently discovered there. Several foreign companies have been mining minerals there, while others are prospecting for more. Some of them operate in areas where gunmen have been terrorizing parts of the state. A few of them had already halted mining, but there are some whose operations have gone on even in the midst of armed raids. President Buhari's directive gave them only 48 hours to shut operations and vacate. Security chiefs who met with the president suspected some of the miners were paying protection fees to the gunmen.
Over time, we've been monitoring concerns by residents of the state that why is it that the miners are not being attacked by the bandits, both the foreign miners and the local miners. So that discussion has been ongoing for quite a while, suggesting that perhaps either the miners are paying off the bandits or the bandits are actually helping the miners to continue their profession, quote and unquote. On the other hand, the citizens of the state have been complaining that they are not benefiting from the mining activities.
The directive does not say when mines in Zamfara will reopen, but the Ministry for Minerals has said that the suspension is a remedial measure and mining would resume soon enough. Armed gangs have become a major security threat in Nigeria's northwest. The gunmen, or bandits as they are called by the government, have killed hundreds this year alone and continue to displace thousands in the state. Nigeria's military has been battling to defeat them, and as news emerged of the suspension of mining in the state, the Air Force claimed it killed 25 of the gunmen in air raids. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, earlier on we spoke to Dixon Osagie, who is a security expert on the unfolding security situation in Zamfara state. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, in Zamfara state in Nigeria, we've been experiencing a high spate of insecurity, and the government decisions to have given the miners 48 hours to vacate that region is for them to ensure their own security strategies they are going to apply in curtailing such kind of incidents. But I believe they are trying to apply a form of crime prevention through environmental design, in the sense that they've actually analyzed and assessed the vulnerability of that environment, and they also know the root causes of that banditry in Zamfara. Zamfara state has claimed over 3,000 lives since the start of the incident, which commenced in the year 2001, from 2011, in between the herders and farmers' clashes. And the state governor himself, I think, should be sued for dereliction of duty, because he has not taken into account the spate of insecurity in the state. He's governing the states from outside the states. That is to say, he's governing Zamfara state from Abuja and other parts of the world. He's not paying attention to details in what's happening in the state. About 500 people have been kidnapped in this period of time. Over thousands of houses has been burnt down. 3,000 lives has been displaced. The system in which we are applying our security response is security applications. It's more of responsive instead of being proactive, because when we talk about security, we are supposed to go before the loss. But here we go after the loss, and which is not good for our government. But I think the government itself have seen what's happening, and we are not in the good limelight. When you look at the GTI index, that is the Global Terrorism Index that was released in 2018, Nigeria is number 3rd most affected terrorism state in the world. After Iraq, Afghanistan, Nigeria is number 3. And this is not a good number for us because we are doing so well negatively. So the government strategies in this area, I don't know what they want to apply. But for me, I should advise the federal government should look at a situation whereby they should be able to delink these insurgents, demobilize these insurgents, and de-resource these insurgents. Because where they are getting their fundings for is really worrisome. Because there are two ways to counter insurgency. We have the kinetic approach and the non-kinetic approach. The military might alone will not defeat terrorism. We must take that to the drawing board. The military might alone will not defeat terrorism, because it can take the military one day to defeat terrorism. But what about the ideology? Ideology could take eternity to be destroyed. So we're looking forward to seeing some organization coming on board so that they could be able to apply the aid approach, that is the non-kinetic approach, to support our military in countering this menace in the northeast.
Now to Sudan. President Omar al-Bashir was chairing a national dialogue meeting while protesters continue to call for his resignation. On Tuesday at dawn, security forces tried to disperse demonstrators at the sit-in outside the Defence Ministry. The country's opposition party said that about 20 people have been killed and dozens more wounded. Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Egyptians to vote on re-establishment of Upper House. And Tunisians' fury over government's decision to raise legal retirement age.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
AfricaLive. Find your voice.
In Mozambique, the United Nations World Food Programme is raising concerns that the country could face hunger as a third disaster after a storm and a cholera outbreak. The organisation says it has fed 700,000 people so far. Cyclone Idai swept in from the Indian Ocean shortly before thousands of subsistence farmers planned to bring in their harvest. Mozambique's disaster management agency says more than 1.7 million acres of crop fields were inundated. Farmers say they cannot plant crops as their farming tools and seeds have been swept away by the floods.
There were about 1.8 million people who were affected by the cyclone and then the flooding that came afterwards. And we're hoping to feed 1.7 million of them. We've already reached 700,000. We've still got lots of problems with the roads and the bridges because conditions are really quite terrible. And we've had to bring in amphibious vehicles, special vehicles that can just tackle about anything.
Today is the first time I've received food. Until now, I was only eating what my daughters and grandchildren had received in assistance after losing their homes.
Well, we are now joined by CGTN's Robert Nagila on the latest in Mozambique. Robert, how is the government dealing with the loss of crops there and the destruction of infrastructure in the country?
Well, Karen, the government's priority at this particular moment is ensuring that much needed humanitarian assistance is getting to the affected areas, which translates to access, which means building roads, bridges, basically taking care of the infrastructure. For example, in Beira, Mozambique's second largest city where we are at this particular moment, a link has already been established with the town of Buzi, which is about 250 kilometers away. So you now have aid and humanitarian assistance getting to that particular place. However, to the south of Buzi, you still have a problem there, and the government is trying to sort out the infrastructure in that particular region so that you have aid and humanitarian assistance, medical supplies getting to that particular place. So the government's priority at this particular moment is ensuring that no more lives are lost. Of course, they are thinking about investments. That is at the back of their heads. They will need to sort out the economy of this particular region at some particular point. But at this particular moment, the humanitarian assistance tops everything else, Karen.
And of course, now we've got this third disaster looming. How is the government and international organisations dealing with concerns that the country could face hunger?
Well, it's a never-ending tragic story, isn't it? Because first you had Cyclone Idai, followed by the floods, and then you had cholera outbreaks, then you had malaria, and now they're talking about hunger and about potentially 1.7 million people potentially affected. A huge number after everything that this country has already been through in the last 3 or so odd weeks. Now, we know that WFP and the government have been assessing the situation on the ground, preparing for something exactly like this in the last couple of weeks, because Cyclone Idai basically wiped out crops in farmland in the hinterland, and these crops would have been the saving grace. However, that's not happening at this particular moment. So those assessments have been carried out. We know that over 700,000 people have already received food assistance. We know that a further 10,000 people are receiving daily food aid, and that number potentially will climb. As the aid agencies are saying, they expect to reach about 1.7 million people. So they are aware of the problem and they are doing something about it. So this is not going to catch them by surprise. The question now is, will they be able to reach some of those communities who've not been touched yet by any humanitarian assistance in time? So they are trying their best, but the terrain, of course, the infrastructure is creating havoc for them, but they are doing their best. Karen?
And finally, Robert, how are the people of Beira coping with all of this?
Well, at this particular moment, they're coping as well as can be expected. That cyclone was a psychological traumatic effect on the local community here. In the aftermath of Cyclone Idai, there was a huge cleanup exercise in and around the city. Now people are trying to bring back some semblance of normalcy, if you can say that. Throughout the day, today and over the last few days, we've seen businesses, residents, people basically trying to rebuild their lives, to rebuild their homes and businesses as well. Now, we also are told that we should expect to see schools in and around Beira function, or rather operational, all schools around Beira operational in the next couple of weeks, which humanitarian observers here and the government say that is still quite a challenge, but they expect them to be up and running. We visited one of the schools today and met a principal. Now, this is a school that basically serves the local community where children from a poor neighborhood normally go there. And they say that despite the struggles they have, they're trying to ensure that everybody comes back to the school community, because this would basically remove, or rather help with that psychological effect that some of the students have been experiencing since that cyclone hit this particular city. However, outside Beira, the situation remains critical. It's really difficult to say as to when schools will reopen, when students will be able to go back to school. A lot of equipment has been lost, books and etc. So there's still a lot to work on, but some good news that schools are reopening in Beira in the next couple of weeks. Karen?
Okay, thank you very much for that, Robert. That was CGTN's Robert Nagila there on the latest in Mozambique. Egypt will soon re-establish an upper house in parliament. Egyptians are set to vote in a referendum that aims to create a Senate. It'll be an advisory body to assist legislation. As CGTN's Adel El Mahrouhi reports, the upper house may turn out to be a replication of the former upper house, which was not that influential.
Following the 2011 January uprising, Egypt cancelled its upper house of the parliament in efforts to restructure the legislative system. This month, however, the parliament wants to change the constitution again to establish a senate.
When we started our work in the Egyptian new parliament, we discovered that we need another chamber. To legislate, we have numerous numbers of laws pending discussion. The parliament does not have time for most of them.
According to the suggested amendments, the Senate opinion will be taken in any constitutional amendments, constitution-related laws, national development projects, treaties and agreements related to sovereignty, and to review legislations assigned from the president.
The Senate will revise and contribute to what we do. Working in the parliament made us realize that having one chamber has many flaws. We don't have the expertise that could help with legislation and monitoring the government. When decisions are made on two levels, it usually leads to better legislation.
The Egyptian president will have the right to appoint 1/3 of the Senate's members.
The recommended amendments suggest that the Prime Minister, his deputies and members of the cabinet cannot be held accountable before the Senate. With these limitations to its powers, some politicians believe it may be a replication of the upper house of the parliament, which has been cancelled because it lacked influential authority. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
South Sudanese President Salva Kiir has met with Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte in Rome. The meeting comes ahead of a spiritual retreat at the Vatican. Kiir, together with opposition leader Riek Machar, are set to meet with Pope Francis, where the focus will be on the implementation of the recently signed peace agreement. The deal is at a critical stage as Kiir and Machar head towards the formation of a unity government. Let's now head to Nigeria, where lawmakers are set to vote on the police reform bill. The country's Senate has already passed the Police Trust Fund bill. The reform bill looks to put in place tougher guiding principles. This includes holding police officers accountable for misusing their weapons. It also looks to establish an independent authority to investigate complaints of officer misconduct. Both bills come as Nigerians have been calling for police forces to be reformed.
These bills will actually help the IG empower him to be able to carry out fundamental and far-reaching reforms that will help to reposition our police force.
Now to Tunisia, and the government's decision to raise the retirement age by 2 years has been described as a necessary social and economic reform to prevent depletion of social funds. However, this has been met by fury from ordinary Tunisians. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shawashi with more.
The Tunisian parliament has adopted a new law which sets the retirement age at 62 years. It provides for an increase in pension contributions to 3%. 2% are paid by the employer from the first day of the month following the entry into force of the new law, while the employee contribution will increase by 1% from January 2020.
The adoption of the draft law raising the retirement age is an important step towards reforming social security funds. This law will improve the financial conditions of the funds. It will contribute to providing a better quality of services for pensioners.
The new law also provides for a 1-year increase in the retirement age for employees who will reach 60 from the 1st of July to December 31st, 2019, and a 2-year increase from the 1st of January 2020 for employees who will have reached 60 next year.
Several measures will be taken as part of the reform of the social security system. These include the use of smart electronic cards for members of the National Health Insurance Fund and the allocation of subsidies to needy families.
The new law has caused fury across Tunisia. People from all ages and social classes have slammed the government and parliament's decision to increase retirement age.
It's unacceptable to work until 62. Some civil servants will have spent more than 35 years at public administrations. There will be more unemployment among young people.
We know that social funds are facing difficulties, but the solution should not be at the expense of workers. The state has run out of ideas to solve the economic crisis, which hit all sectors, including social funds.
The Minister of Social Affairs announced that dissuasive measures will be taken in case of social evasion in the public or private sector.
Tunisian authorities stressed that social dialogue will continue with the civil society and the syndicates with a view to adopting new reform measures to ensure the financial stability of social funds in Tunisia. The government also pointed out that the new law will not limit employment opportunities for young people. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Over now to Croatia, where Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is on an official visit. During his stay, he's scheduled to attend a leaders' meeting of China and Central and Eastern European countries, or the CEEC, in the seaside city of Dubrovnik. Today, he met with the country's Prime Minister, Andrej Plenković. In a joint press conference, Premier Li said he hoped the two sides could increase their bilateral trade.
We are willing to bring more imported products from Croatia. We hope to also bring balance and sustainability in trade relations. When Prime Minister Plenković invited me to dinner last night, he introduced me to distinct Croatian agricultural products. I told him many Chinese people would be willing to try and enjoy them. China's door is always open to Croatia.
Well, Prime Minister Plenković said both countries wanted to advance their economic cooperation. The CEEC leaders' meeting is expected to focus on expanding business and other links between China and countries in the region. Li is the first Chinese premier to visit the Balkan country since they established diplomatic ties 27 years ago. Earlier, he said China would like to bring their partnership to a new level. Beijing says the significance of the agreement between China and the European Union is way beyond the bilateral scope. This comes after Premier Li Keqiang's visit to Brussels, where the two sides agreed to strengthen trade relations and pledged to work toward facilitating foreign investment in China.
It's normal for China and the EU to have different views on some issues. However, the joint statement issued by both sides shows that differences can be properly resolved through dialogue and consultation. It reflects our determination to strengthen solidarity and cooperation in the face of challenges to multilateralism, of which the significance is way beyond the bilateral scope.
Let's now go to Ucha for all the business news.
Thank you, Karen. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe seeks about $600 million in assistance from donors after a drought and cyclone die. And Africa requires an additional $638 billion annually to meet its sustainable development goals before the 2030 target.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Zimbabwe. The country is appealing for $613 million in aid from local and foreign donors, and that's to cover food imports and help with a humanitarian crisis. Now, the appeal follows a severe drought and a cyclone that battered the east of the country. According to a UN agency, an El Niño-induced drought has wilted crops across the country and left about a third of its 15 million people in need of food assistance. The situation worsened when Zimbabwe, along with Mozambique and Malawi, were last month battered by Cyclone Idai, which left hundreds of thousands needing food, water and shelter. Now, the country's government is seeking about $300 million in aid for food, while the rest will fund emergency shelters, logistics and telecoms, amongst other needs. Meanwhile, the 2019 economic report for the continent by the UN Economic Commission for Africa estimates that financing the Sustainable Development Goals in Africa will require an additional $638 billion annually. That's a figure which the continent must find smart ways to raise. Now, economists are saying that with only 10 years to reach the 2030 goal, the current 3 to 4% economic growth rate on the continent is too low right now. Well, CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy spoke to Vera Songwe, who is the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and they unpacked that report.
And the report that we have launched today shows that by raising more revenues, we can actually have the financing that will take us there to the tune of 12 to 20% of GDP, Africa's GDP, which is about $230 billion a year. $230 billion is a lot of resources that can allow us to substantially close that gap.
Different countries in Africa have different priorities. Some are thinking infrastructure, others manufacturing, others health and all that. How are we going to align these priorities so that the continent moves together towards reaching a double-digit economic growth?
And I think that is it's a great question. And again, even in the report that we just launched, we have 5 different options for countries. You can do good fiscal policy, which is in some sense, how you do your tax policies and what kinds of allowances you give to the private sector, whether you want to improve indirect taxes, whether you want to just improve administration, whether you want to look at price erosion and base shifting in your mining sector, or whether you want to control your debt. So there's 5 options. And different countries will pick different options. And this is similar to your question, is we have over 50 countries on the continent. Some will be more interested in making sure that they provide better health care, because health care is the largest issue, particularly in the southern cones of Africa. You have that. In others, it will be energy. If you're in Kenya today, 70% of the population has access to energy, so probably maybe that is not the most important. They're now looking at infrastructure. If you're maybe in Lesotho, you are looking at energy and health. But I think the question is, and this is where the CFTA becomes important, because then you can leverage in, for example, the SADC region, looking at regional value chains. And so you take what is the best in each country to create global wealth or regional wealth.
African countries still have a debt burden, but the economists are advising the continent to move towards self-sustainability as far as financial issues are concerned. But how do we balance a case whereby we still have a debt burden and we still have to repay our loans and we still have bilateral agreements between our countries and foreign countries where we are still borrowing?
No, I think you asked the right question. Today we have over 13 countries on the continent that are at risk of, debt distress. And I think as we work on that issue, there are 2 things that we have to look at. Is one, it's okay to take debt, but you have to make sure that whatever you're borrowing for is going to give you a rate of return that is higher than the cost of the money that you're getting. A lot of the times that is the case initially, but because of governance, because of weaknesses in capacity, it always takes a lot longer to implement an infrastructure project on the continent than it will somewhere else. So if you were meant to implement a project in 6 years and it took you 12 years, the cost of the resources that you borrowed just go up. Now, a second part of it is exactly as you said, bad governance. We don't have enough transparency, there is not enough clarity on the nature of the debt, on the conditions of the debt. And then we also have a problem that many of our countries have currencies that are weakening, and they're borrowing in currencies that are strengthening. You get debt because you think you do not have other ways of getting resources. But we've just shown in the Economic Report for Africa that you can actually raise taxes. There are other assets in our countries, like pension funds, different ways of ensuring that your capital markets, local capital markets and regional capital markets can provide you with some more resources. Countries like Kenya, South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire are doing that. And I think we need to do a lot more on the continent. That will help us balance our debt to GDP ratios a lot more.
And let's head to Ghana now, where erratic power supply is taking its toll on some businesses in the country. Now, the West African nation has attributed the situation to the shutdown of a gas processing plant in the western part of the country. Authorities there say efforts are being made to fix the problem. And here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai with more.
A slow day for Isaac Entry. He owns this printing press in Accra and has to deliver some documents to his customers. But his machines are not running due to a power outage.
We have timelines, we have deadlines to meet. So this power outage is not really helping. Sometimes you have to spend extra on fuel, to get the generators powered to finish up the work. And you end up using all your profits.
The power outage in parts of Ghana, including the capital Accra, is affecting many businesses.
Business owners at this printing press hub are without power throughout the working day. They say they can't afford alternative power supply, such as a generator, and want the situation addressed as soon as possible.
The government says the situation is a result of a shutdown of a faulty gas processing plant in the western region, which supplies fuel to the hydro plants in the country. Engineers are now on site fixing the plant. Ghana's Power Distribution Services team says there's nothing more it can do.
We are not doing generation, and so if upstream they have a problem with fuel in terms of the gas being shut down, it's a matter of rectifying or completing the job, and then they getting the fuel and then giving us the power to distribute. And that's why we continue to apologize for what has happened, because we don't have control.
However, the country had already been experiencing erratic power supply for close to 3 months now. There are still concerns among Ghanaians about whether the country is not generating enough power from its hydro and thermal plants, as happened 3 years ago, leading to a power crisis. But some energy experts think it's actually due to localized issues, including faulty power transmitters and damage to electricity equipment during storms.
Some of the problems we have in now are not because we don't have generation. The one that comes on and goes off, and sometimes you see the power surging, it is not a generation problem. These are localized problems that we need to be able to address so that we have stable power.
Isaac Entry agrees the country needs a more stable electricity supply. His printing business can only thrive on uninterrupted power. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And in some corporate news, the South African arm of Nissan will spend about $213 million equipping its local plant to build the new Navara model. Now, Managing Director at Nissan South Africa, Mike Whitfield, says the car maker's plant in Roslyn, near Pretoria, will increase by 30,000 units in the first phase, while the plant's permanent headcount will increase by 400. While production operations elsewhere will also build the new Navara, a pickup, Nissan South Africa will supply the local and continental market. Now, Whitfield also said his unit had to beat other global Nissan production operations in order to win the right to produce the Navara. A victory for his unit and also South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, ahead of elections coming up in May. Well, that's all for now on AfricaLive Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, London Supreme Court rules that nearly 2,000 Zambian villagers now have the right to sue Vedanta Mining Company in English courts. Of course, the villagers are alleging that their land was polluted by the company. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, it's back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Ucha. We are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including thousands flock to the 35th Tunisian International Book Fair.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
AfricaLive. Find your voice.
To Tunisia, where over 20,000 visitors have attended the International Book Fair in the capital Tunis so far. It's one of the oldest and largest book fairs in North Africa, where writers and publishing houses can come together to keep alive book reading. Chinese publishers are introducing books that have been translated into French or Arabic to help Tunisians learn more about China's past and its present. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi now reports.
The 35th edition of the International Book Fair of Tunis has opened at the Convention Center, north of the capital city. 319 publishing houses from 24 countries, including 116 Arab, African and international exhibitors, are partaking in the book fair. It is considered as one of the most important cultural events of the year in the North African state.
This is our fourth participation as a publishing house. We are selling stories and sources of inspiration, not pepper. There is a great demand for books. This is unbelievable. I thought that people no longer read.
Imen organizes workshops for children. She spends several hours reading, then explaining tales to young boys and girls. Rewriting the stories and acting is one of the favorite and most attractive activities at the book fair.
Reading, creating scenes from the tales, then acting in a public space is an extraordinary exercise. Children nurture their imagination and increase book attractiveness.
Some people have come from distant towns and cities to partake in workshops and to buy new books.
I have traveled for 300 kilometers to attend this workshop and to buy books from the fair. I'm passionate about reading. I am discovering the world through books.
The stand of the Chinese Cultural Center in Tunisia here at the 35th edition of the Tunis International Book Fair has attracted visitors of all ages and social classes.
Tens of books on Chinese culture, language and civilization, as well as 6 Chinese legends written by prominent writers, are at display at this stand.
The Chinese legends talk about universal values. They are translated from Mandarin to Arabic by university teachers and students. Tunisians love Chinese culture and read Chinese books to discover this great civilization.
Over 20,000 people have attended the book fair. The Ministry of Culture is expecting at least 15,000 additional visitors in the next few days. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
In South Africa, the Sung Ching Ling Foundation recently celebrated its 10th anniversary by reviewing its charitable contribution to the local community. The foundation was established in March 2009 in Cape Town. In 2015, Sung Ching Ling Foundation donated approximately $171,000 to build a 1,500 square metre children's home in South Africa.
The organization itself is centered at upliftment of young people and the community at large, and women also. So by us having this extended building, it will help us to reach to the goal and to the vision of the organization by creating more jobs, by creating more skills development for the needy.
Over the last 10 years, Sung Ching Ling Foundation has really helped in building the friendship between China and South Africa. The China Welfare Institute would like to join hands with Sung Ching Ling Foundation in South Africa in promoting the charitable causes in South Africa.
We have all the sports news coming up for you after the break, including South Africa's Bafana Bafana anxiously waiting for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations draw on Friday.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We begin with African football. The draw for the 2019 Africa